Here I am in the kitchen. I've just made myself a cup of tea. I haven't tried this flavour before. It's a lemon and ginger herbal infusion. It smells pretty potent. I will let you know how it goes before the end of the film. What I wanted to do first of all, as we get into this lovely passage from Romans 11, is point out one or two of the devices and methods that Paul uses to get his point across. First of all, he uses something which is called biblical paradox. You might know what that is. You might wonder what that is. It's when a person says something seemingly a little contradictory, but they do it because they want to capture a bigger truth, something so enormous that if you say directly what you mean, it doesn't fully capture it. Let me give you an example. Years ago when I was teaching a class, I asked them to give examples of paradoxical statements that make sense. One young man who was very, very clever thought about it for a while and said, "What about this? I have never seen so well since I've become blind." Now, on the surface, that sentence makes no sense at all, because if you go blind, you can't see anything. You are blind. And yet this person is saying, "I've never seen so well since I've been blind." So what does it mean? It means that perhaps after the person has gone blind, all of their other senses and all of their other means of gaining awareness of the world are heightened and become clearer. And they suddenly have this weird feeling, even though they are blind, they've never perceived the world seen as well. It's a paradoxical statement to get across a very complex and subtle point. And that's how paradox is used. It seems contradictory, but when you dig in a little deeper, it isn't a contradiction at all. It's capturing something beautiful. Well, Paul uses that as a means of getting some of his points across. Another technique that Paul uses to get his point across in this letter is the technique of the surprising story. That is where, as the reader or the listener is engaging with the story, it seems to be going in one direction and suddenly it swaps over and goes in another unusual direction, and it increases the impact of the story. A great example of this was written about 20 years ago by an author called Toby Forward. That's a great name, isn't it? And Toby Forward wrote a book called The Wolf's Story, and it's a reimagining of Little Red Riding Hood, but it's told from the wolf's perspective, where instead of the wolf being big and bad and mean, in fact the wolf comes across very, very well, and it's Red Riding Hood who is the real meanie. It's an amusing story, it's a kid's favourite, it's become very popular over the years, and it gets across a point. And it's very, very memorable. Well, Paul employs that technique as well. The surprising story. A third technique that Paul uses in this marvellous section of the letter, this complicated section of the letter, is referred to as the golden thread technique. Sometimes in a slightly less romantic but very easily understandable way, it's referred to as a stick of rock technique, as in there's something written all the way through it. There is a theme that keeps recurring, that Paul keeps making subtle references to. So what is the golden thread that goes all the way through Romans chapter 11? It is the theme of grace, the thread of grace. Paul subtly whispers in our ear over and over again, it's all about grace. It's all about grace. It's all about the grace of our wonderful God who loves us and gave us his Son to be our very own, to be our salvation, our brother, our friend, the one who opens the doors of heaven for us. It's all about grace, undeserved favour from God. So, in the next 3 little films, we are going to explore how Paul uses these techniques to get across some very, very important points to his listeners, his readers, way back then in ancient Rome and right here today. I'm going to finish my tea and then we'll find somewhere nice to sit and do the next part of this little series. Oh, it's sharp but refreshing.